Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.
Sure, thank you very much, Hubert, and thank you for the invitation to join. You're right, because there's technical challenges, and I won't repeat those. Gunter and others have addressed them. But then there's the psychological challenges, and let's consider that for a second. Pension funds tend to be intrinsically conservative bodies. They report to their boards, and they report to in our case, our depositors, because it's their money. And that conservatism leads to something of a fear of the unknown. And that's normal. I think that's a human nature that's probably pretty universal. And because of that, it takes extra convincing to bring people along to invest in new markets simply where they've never been before. They lack that experience. They lack what I like to call the 911 button. Whether, for us, we're based in Canada, we have a long-standing relationship in the United States, we have long-standing presence in Europe. When things go wrong, and things do go wrong, because if things didn't go wrong, there'd be no risk and there'd be no returns. So things will inevitably go wrong. They know who they can call. They have that 911 button. We have our series of dense relationships with governments, with other co-investors, other representatives of the private sector. And so there's a comfort with that the risks can be managed. Unfortunately, across Africa or a lot of other emerging economies, we don't have that dense network of relationships yet. And so one of the ways to try and fast track this, because to develop those is a long, almost a generational process that would take 20, 30 years. But we need to fast track that if we're going to reach the goals of 2030 and 2050. So we need to think about how to do that. And one great example, as Hubert mentioned, is partnering with local pension funds and sovereign funds in the region who have second to none knowledge of their local economies, are generally well connected to the business and political communities, and can serve as those intermediaries that can provide that comfort level to those who have very little familiarity with the market. There's other partners too. The World Bank, the multilateral development banks, even the United Nations. Even though the United Nations is not a financial institution, it has presence in virtually every developing country in the world and long-standing political ties. So thinking about clever ways of leveraging the United Nations presence to bring more comfort to institutional investors in these markets, in addition to the local pension and sovereigns, the multilateral development banks, bilateral development finance institutions or national development banks, forging those partnerships. That's sort of the shortcut to the much longer hard work that we'll need to do over 20 or 30 years to develop those dense network of relationships to bring the same level of comfort in Africa as we would in, say, the United States.
Doing business in Africa. You can't afford to be without Africa Investor.